Chapter 5 Sundering. The world changed after Koilos and became a darker place in the months that followed. Urza retreated to the quarters he shared with his brother as soon as the three investigators returned to the camp, emerging only for meals. Soon after, Mishra moved out of those quarters, taking a tent among the diggers. He could have taken a permanent housing among the students, but Tokasia felt the young man was making a statement both to his brother and to her. The two brothers sniped at each other continually now. Urza noted publicly that Mishra had instructed the students to dig too deep. Mishra shot back that Urza was demanding more students to clean the artifacts that he truly needed. Mealtimes were particularly stressful. The arguments were no longer exchanges of wordplay and ideas. An edge of steel, like the blade of a dagger, had slipped into the boys' conversations. Questions now seemed like barbed hooks, and answers held hints of threat and challenge. A few times, Mishra blew up at his brother at the table, and after a month, Urza stopped attending the communal dinners at all, instead taking his meals in his quarters. He had apparently used Mishra's half of the room to expand his workspace, which irritated his brother all the more. Mishra appeared at dinner for a month beyond that, brooding over the meals. Then he began to dine in the diggers' camp. Neither brother spoke of personal matters, not to Tokasia, nor anyone else. To the old scholar, they were polite and tried to keep the conversation focused on the nature of the excavations, for Mishra, or on the latest reassembled marvel, for Urza. When the subject of the caverns came up, however, both young men would turn taciturn and abrupt. In part, Tokasia felt, it was the stones that had altered their relationship. Urza had fit his to a claw-like clasp of gold and wore it about his neck on a chain. Mishra too wore his around his neck, but in a small leather sack dangling from a thong in the manner of the Falaji talismans. Tokasia did not know if the shattered power stone had created the anger within her two best students, or merely unearthed and crystallized resentments that had been fermented for years. Soon after Koilos, she went to each and asked to examine the stones themselves, seeking to unlock their mystery. Urza refused to give up his stone. Instead, he said he wanted to examine it himself. Surely Tokasia trusted him to make a fair and rational examination? What he did not say, though Tokasia sensed it, was that he was afraid she would turn over the stone to his brother. Mishra would play on the old scholar's feelings. He was the younger brother. Therefore, Tokasia would give Mishra a chance to examine both halves of the stone. Mishra, in turn, would not give up his stone. If Urza kept his half of the stone, he said contemptuously, he would hold his as well. What he did not say, but Tokasia felt, was that he was afraid she would turn over the stone to his brother. Urza would appeal to her reasoning. Urza was the elder brother. Therefore, Tokasia would give Urza the chance to examine both halves of the stone. The archaeologist was thoroughly frustrated. Neither brother would move without the other. Neither trusted her sufficiently to let her examine the gems. She turned to the other stones, both the flickering fragments that still held some power and the dull, cracked remains that had lost their energies. There was nothing there. None of the power stones they had discovered had similar powers. Mishra's stone seemed to induce weakness in its targets, whether living or artificial. Urza's gem apparently strengthened its targets, and in fact, allowed the spark of animation to enter the barest of mechanical husk. No other stones, Tokasia noted sadly, seemed to have encouraged such avarice and anger in their possessors. The nature of the energy itself continued to elude Tokasia. She knew it existed, and that it could be harnessed by the devices using the Thrandazides they had deciphered. Yet the nature of that energy was beyond her. What was it, and how did it come into being? Was it natural to the crystals, or was it something that Thran had entrapped there? The questions were there, but not the answers, and her own failure to answer darkened Tokasia's mood further. To be fair, the black moon in the camp was not all the brothers doing, at least not directly. More Falaji than Amal had expected were offended by the fact that the archaeologist and her colleagues had found the secret heart of the Thran. Diggers abandoned the camp in droves. Old Amal was clearly embarrassed by this turn of events, since he had assured Tokasia that few of his people would be scared away by ancient legends of the long-dead Thran. Indeed, as word of the discovery of Koilos spread, the flow of artifacts recovered by the desert people, so abundant in previous years, dried up almost entirely. Part of that drought was caused by an increase in desert raids. A number of tribes, such as the Sawardi, quiet for decades, were more active now. They raided merchant caravans and even struck into Argav itself. The school had not been attacked, owing to its own group of native Falaji, but it was only a matter of time, Tokasia felt. Amal agreed.
There are numbers beyond numbers of families, tribes, and clans among the Falaji,
he said one evening, 10 months after Koilos. They sat beneath Tokasia's tarp, sipping nabis. Most of the rest of the camp had gone to bed. The only lamps still burning were from Urza's quarters, and those had been dimmed. The brazier between Tokasia and Amal crackled low. The Falaji spread his fingers and ticked off a roster of tribal names.
The wealthy Muhari, the once mighty Gestos, and my own tribe, the Thaladin, he said. There are others like the Tomokur, who have the nearest thing you outlander people would think of as a city. The Tomoko claim general rulership over the others, but they are not the true masters of the various tribes either. The clans follow strong leaders. So for one generation, everyone followed the Gestos because they had a wise leader. For the next, they followed the Muharin because the Muharin had a great warrior as their leader.
And now the desert people follow a new tribe, said Tokasia bitterly, sipping at her nabis. She took it hot, in the desert style, but never cared for the cinnamon.
The Sawardi,
agreed Amal.
They moved in from the southwestern lands when I was a boy, from the area bordering the outlander state of Yodia. They have a Kadir, a leader who has gained many allies. He talks of the old times when the Falaji people were powerful, and he fans resentment against the coastal nations, particularly those who are spreading into Falaji lands.
Are these Sawardi your leaders now? Asked Tokasia. Amal shrugged.
Not like your kings and warlords and nobles are leaders. My people put great value and respect. They respect the Sawardi for what they have accomplished, and therefore listen to their message. Many worry about the coastal nations moving inland, taking land from the traditional Falaji grounds. Many worry about the discoveries we are making.
We are discovering things for everyone, Tokasia said flatly.
That I agree with, returned Amal. And I thought the others would agree as well. But they see the artifacts they bring in to trade, as well as the ones we dig up, moving eastward to Argive, southeast to Corliss, or south to Yodia. They worry what great and wondrous things are being lost to them.
And these Sawardi play on that worry, concluded Tokasia. They gather power by creating a common threat, whether one is truly present or not. Amal nodded and said dryly,
You are familiar with the process.
Tokasia laughed and took a long pull on her nabis. Basic Argivian politics. The kings of Argive have survived for years on that principle, playing one faction against another. They do things in Penregan that would make your head spin. At least the Falaji are honest about being someone's enemy.
This is why we have not moved, and should not move the base camp to Koilos, said Amal.
The only way into the canyon where the caverns are found is through the deep desert, Tokasia began.
The deep desert is held by the Sawardi tribe and their allies. Word has gone out that any non-Falaji found in their lands will be considered Sawardi property, to be disposed as they see fit.
Tokasia spread her hands and looked at the wooden surface beneath her wrinkled fingers. The desert had practically won its battle with the great Argivian table. It was wobbly and brittle now. The last of its pearl inlay had surrendered to the differences in temperature and to the dust. Soon she would have to break it up for firewood. Tokasia had not realized how much she would miss the table, both as a level space and as a reminder of distant Penregan. Would they have had this problem with the tribesmen had Urza had not been so brilliant with maps and calculations, or Mishra so close to the desert tribes and their legends? Tokasia shook her head. The past was the past, as inviolate as the rocks from which she and her followers pulled the throwing devices, as solid as the metals they carefully pieced together in the workshops. A silence grew between her and Amal. The only sound was the crackle of the brazier.
You are not thinking of the desert tribes or your dig site, said Amal at last. You are thinking of your two young men.
Tokasia let the silence continue, then said, They have been fighting again.
Ever since they visited the secret heart of the Old Ones, said Amal.
Tokasia shot the leader of the diggers a look, and he held up a hand.
No, they do not tell me what happened there. No one tells this old digger anything, but it is clear to me and everyone else they had a great falling out, the kind of battle that brothers do not recover from. Last week they almost came to blows at the dig site.
He shot her a sidelong glance.
You know?
Tokasia nodded. Urza thought Mishra was digging too deep to find any parts for an amulet. When the diggers found such parts, Urza all but accused Mishra of planting the find there in the trench.
Mishra found the pieces of that amulet shoulder mounting fairly, said Amal. But then he drove the diggers on it to the heat of midday, when we normally nap. He would have been happy with nothing less than the complete amulet rising from the earth, fully formed and alive, just to prove his brother wrong.
Tokasia nodded. Each day they get worse, and neither wants to talk to the other about it. Whenever they're in the same place, the conversation breaks down into an argument. Then they continue arguing with me afterward, trying to show me more where the other was wrong. And when I try to show them that they may be wrong, each acts as if I've sided with the other. The past few months have been the worst of all the years I've known them.
Amal leaned forward. The Falaji believe that the man is made of stone and fire, sky and water. The perfect man holds all these elements in balance. The younger brother, he has had more fire than he needed on the first day I met him, and he has more fire than he needs now. The older brother is consumed by stone, cold and unyielding. unable to bend. He will shatter or be worn away.
Your guardians have a similar belief, though few follow it these days, said Tokasi. The world is divided into reality and dreams. The old temple priest of Argive would say both those young men have been consumed by their dreams and are forgetting their reality. Amal grunted.
Does Urza speak of dreams to you?
Tokasi shook her head. Urza speaks to no one anymore. Not to me, not to his brother. She looked at the diggers. Does Misha? Amal nodded.
Not to me, but he does speak. To Hajar, one of my younger assistants, who is closer to him in age and temperament. Hajar has been bitten hard by the fire as well, and he dreams of being a great warrior. I fear we will lose him to the Sawardi, and soon. But Mishra has told Hajar, who has told me, and I tell you, that Mishra has dreams.
Of what? Asked Tokasi, pouring herself more in a beast.
Darkness,
said Amal, spreading his fingers out to catch the warmth of the brazier.
He says there is a darkness out there, a darkness that sings to him and tries to draw him to it. He tugs at it like a jackal hanging on his trouser legs, and he fears it.
He said that? Prompted Tokasia. Amal shrugged.
Mishra talks to Hajar, Hajar talks to me, I talk to you. Each time someone talks to another, things are added, other things forgotten. Perhaps you should ask him yourself. He probably would not tell Hajar, Hajar, I am afraid of my dreams. But Mishra does sleep in the diggers' camp, and everyone knows he sometimes awakens in the middle of the night, shouting at things that are not there.
Tokasia was silent for a moment. She could not say if Mishra had done this before Koilos, when Mishra and Urza had quartered together, but Urza had never said anything about the matter, nor had Urza spoken of his own dreams, if indeed he had any. You know they each took something with them when they left Koilos? Asked Tokasia.
The gems of power, replied Amal. They look like the ones that you say move the old one's machines. Each of the young masters has one, yet each man keeps a stone close to himself at all times.
Could the stones be responsible? Queried Tokasia. Could these energies be causing the young men to act like this? Amal shrugged, and Tokasia added, Do you know what their stones can do?
Mishra had not talked to me of the matter, said Amal flatly. Perhaps to Hajar, but he let the words hang in the hot desert air for a long moment.
Urza's gem makes things stronger, said the scholar. He calls it his might stone. Mishra seems to have the opposite effect. Urza has named it the weak stone.
Amal chortled. That probably does not sit well with the younger brother, to have the weaker stone.
It doesn't, said Tokasa. Urza knows it, so he calls it that to Mishra's face.
What does Mishra call it? Asked Amal.
Tokasia thought for a moment. I've never heard him refer to it as one thing or another. It's his, Mishra's, stone, and the other one is his, Urza's stone.
That sounds right, observed Amal. The older brother always had a tendency to name things, to identify them. It makes them his, I suppose.
Tokasia sighed. All these years they have been with us, she said, and they remain as great a mystery as the energy within those power crystals, as the Thran themselves.
The Thran, the old ones, you and I will understand, eventually, replied Amal. For they have the good sense to stay dead. The living, they keep changing as time goes along. It is harder to climb upon a moving mount.
Old Falaji saying? Tokasia raised her cup.
Old digger saying, said Amal, returning the salute. From this old digger in particular.
The conversation moved to other subjects, such as the new layer of hard sandstone they encountered at the second site, and whether Bly would need additional outriders for his caravan, and how much he would try to charge Tokasia for them. Finally, Amal made farewells and left the tarp. The night was pleasant, and Tokasia knew she would probably sleep sitting up in her camp chair, wrapped in a soft fur from dwarven sardia. Amal slowly walked through the camp. The fires had been banked, and the lamps had all been extinguished. Even the lamps from Urza's quarters, usually the last to be doused, were now darkened. The old digger stood in the center of the camp and looked upward at the stars. The moons had not risen yet, and above the old Falashi, the sky pinwheeled in a heavy scattering of stars. Amal tried to imagine if the sky over the far-off coastal cities looked this beautiful, and decided against it. Fires burned long and wastefully into the night there, obscuring the sky with their smoke, so much like city peoples everywhere. There was a movement to his left, and the sound of sandals scraping against the dirt. Slowly, Amal turned toward the noise, keeping his head raised toward the stars, but allowing his eyes to sweep the shadows, The moonless light was dark, but not dark enough to foil the sharp eyes of the Falaji. There was a rustle along the shadowed side of one of the students' barracks. Then came a soft, muffled cough.
"Someone there?"
called Amal, suddenly looking directly at the shadow.
"Show yourself, shadowy one, or I'll wake the camp."
A lean form stepped from the shadows, dressed in dark linen, thin and wiry. Amal recognized Hajar, chief of his assistants. The young Falashi smiled guiltily, his teeth filling his narrow face.
"It is a beautiful night, and I could not sleep,"
he said.
"I thought I would go for a walk."
Amal smiled.
"It is a beautiful night, and I've been walking myself," he said. "Let us stroll back together."
The old digger turned away, but Hajar did not move from his position.
"Are you coming?"
Amal asked, then added with a smile.
"Or are you not alone?"
To the shadows behind Hajar, he said,
"You can come out now as well."
Amal had expected Hajar's companion to be one of the noble girl students entrusted to Tokasia. Such romances, though officially frowned upon, were common enough, and Amal still remembered his own youth well enough to know all the justifications and excuses one makes in such situations. A stern lecture and a word to Tokasia to keep an eye on the Argivian girl was all that usually resulted from such a discovery. Amal was thus surprised when the figure who stepped out from the shadows was not a young woman, but the familiar, broad-shouldered form of Mishra. Amal's smile turned to puzzlement, and the old digger said,
"Good evening, young master. Are you enjoying the beautiful night?"
Mishra smiled, and even in the starlight, Amal could see it was a thin, inconsequential smile.
"I needed to fetch something from Urza's, from my old quarters," he said. "I brought Hajar along to help."
"I see," said Amal cautiously.
"And this something was so critical that you needed to fetch it now, in the dead of night, when even your brother would be asleep?"
"Yes," said Mishra. The young man seemed to be turning the idea over in his mind a few times, then apparently he decided to stick with it. His back straightened, and he said again,
"Yes, something important. Do you doubt me?"
By this time, Amal had closed the distance between himself and the pair. He could smell the odor of desert wine on them. It was more powerful than on himself.
"Not at all, young Master Mishra,"
said Amal.
"And this is something is so heavy and you need a second man, or perhaps a third to carry it?"
"Yes," said Mishra, then perhaps feeling he had given too much away, corrected himself.
"No, not really. Hajar is here more for company."
"Ah," said Amal.
"Well, I have a need for Hajar. If you could spare him, he can run an errand for me."
Mishra's face clouded, and Amal wondered if the lad would continue alone or merely abandon his task. It was obvious he was headed for his brothers, and Amal thought it was likely the younger brother planned to confront Urza with an argument. The youth had obviously taken his courage from a wineskin, a time-consuming task that accounted for the late hour. Mishra gave another thin smile.
"Of course. If you need Hajar for some matter, I can gladly do without him." "A small matter," said Amal. "I could use the help, but I tell you again, I don't think your brother is awake. His lamps are out."
Mishra shook his head.
"Sometimes my brother lies awake in the darkness and plots into the night. I would be surprised if he was truly asleep."
Amal raised his hands in mock surrender.
"As you say. You know him better than I. Come, Hajar. I have work for you."
The wiry Falashi crossed toward Amal, and the older man turned. The pair started back toward the diggers' camp. Amal looked back. Mishra already melted back into the shadows.
"So why are you there, Hajar?"
The narrow-faced youth scowled in the starlit darkness.
"I do not know if I could tell you."
"We are Falaji," said the older man. "If I cared to find out, I could show you that your mother's family and my mother's family share a common mother. Come with me. What are you up to? Stinking of nabis and slinking through the shadows like jackals."
The Falaji stopped, as clearly motion and morale did not work simultaneously. Amal waited. At last, the youth said,